A little village in Tuscarawas County, Ohio, harbors some unique history. History that seems to be alive along the old Ohio and Erie Canal. The preserved 19th century buildings that now serve as inns, shops, restaurants, and museums reverberate to this day with the memories of those who built and lived in this community 200 years ago. Memories so alive that you might just feel some kind of presence. Maybe that accounts for all the ghost stories. Today we learn about the history of Zoar, Ohio, a town that was once a refuge for the persecuted, but eventually folded under the weight of the outside world. A town that many believe still contains the souls of the original founders, who are all too eager to hide in your peripheral vision, waiting for their opportunity to unhinge your mind. So, if you're curious, let's take a walk through history. Zoar is an interesting name for a town, but for those of you who are biblical scholars, you will remember Zoar as the name of the town that Lot and his family escaped to when they fled Sodom before the Lord rained fire and brimstone, destroying both Sodom and Gomorrah for their evil ways. Zoar was Lot's place of refuge. It's no wonder that the immigrants who fled southeastern Germany in the early 1800s due to religious persecution would eventually settle here, build a religious separatist society, and name their community Zoar. Joseph Bimmler led 200 German separatists who were looking for a place where they would be free to practice their own religion. They arrived here in 1817 and built this town. Now, conditions were harsh for the isolated community. People were on the verge of starvation, and they soon realized that the only way they would survive is if they pooled their resources and became a commune, everyone working together for the good of the community. They formed the Society of Separatists of Zoar on April 19, 1819. The idea behind the organization of a commune was that each person donates his or her property to the community. In exchange for labor, the Society of Separatists would provide for his or her needs. The Separatists shared houses, which were identified by a number. The Zoarites gave numbers to 26 of their houses to make it easier to mark the food, milk, and other essentials for distribution to their members. Each house had its own kitchen and communal dining area. And every Friday, a representative from each house would take her basket and collect a week's supply of coffee, sugar, tea, butter, and yarn from the storehouse. All the bread for the village was baked in the bakery building, and in the afternoon the children would bring their bread cloths, numbered with the house number. An appropriate number of loaves would be distributed to each house. This worked very well, and the society became almost totally self-sufficient. Villagers labored at agriculture and in the flour mills, 2 iron foundries, a tin shop, a hotel, and several stores. There was also a cooper and a wagon maker, and those who created textiles. There was a nursery, men's and women's dorms, yes, the husbands and wives lived separately for a time, and children's quarters. In 1822, Zoarites began 8 years of celibacy out of concern for their population growing too rapidly. Children between the ages of 3 and 14 lived apart from their families in dormitories so their parents could work in the occupations and industries in town. When the children were old enough to take on responsibilities, they too joined in, providing their time and effort to sustaining the commune. The community became quite prosperous when the Ohio and Erie Canal crossed over Zoar property. The society contracted to build a 7-mile stretch of the canal in 1825 for $21,000 and later owned several canal boats. This brought traffic into Zoar and customers for their goods as well. When the canal work was completed in 1828, the payment allowed the Zoarites to settle their land debt with the Quakers, whom they were purchasing the land from. Any surplus beyond the community's needs was sold by the society to the outside world. But while the residents stayed isolated, they were also somewhat insulated from the ills of society at large. Then when their spiritual leader Joseph Bimler died, as well as the rest of the town elders, there was no one left with direct experience of the struggles and persecution the community faced before shuttering themselves from the outside world. This led to the accumulation of personal wealth by some and the eventual dissolving of the commune, an experiment that was successful for 80 years. Zoar slowly declined from that point. Members of the community began to leave for bigger cities nearby, and the town soon fell into disrepair. In fact, the village of Zoar was at one point put on the historically endangered list until it was placed on the National Register of Historic Places, which saved the town and its history. Today, Zoar stands as a wonderful testament to what was the most successful commune in American history. Most of the buildings have been restored, so they're not only safe and functional again, they also reflect how the Zoarites lived in the 1800s. But we all know, anytime we renovate or remodel old buildings, the spirits that inhabit those places are somehow awakened, free to roam the earth among the living. One example can be found at the Canal Tavern, formerly known as the Inn on the River. A ghost named George is reported by some to play mischievous tricks on both staff and customers alike. George was a canal boat passenger who became very ill and was put off at the inn with hopes that he would be taken care of in one of the several rooms for rent there. But the man grew much sicker and died. The Zoarites buried him in the Separatist cemetery. His wife was contacted about his unfortunate demise, and she arrived in town a few days later. She insisted that her husband be dug up, as he had money and valuables sewn into his coat. She was told that no one had checked his person and he was buried hastily due to the suspected contagious nature of his illness. Of course, the Zoarites told her that they would not disinter him. The woman went away, but returned a few days later with a man she had hired to exhume her husband. They dug up the body, and the money was recovered. The woman paid her hired man and even offered the society money, but the commune refused. That night, cholera broke out in Zoar. The woman and the hired hand died from an illness on the canal boat, and today George is rumored to haunt the inn where he died. His ghostly pranks include stealing pots, turning on stoves, and imitating the sound of crashing dishes where none have broken. He most often throws items at the living if they make fun of him or his earthly tale. Recently, a guest at the tavern needed to use the restroom. She went to the restroom stall and had just closed the stall door when she heard the hallway door open. She looked out the crack in the stall door and saw a big, bearded man standing there with the door open. He leaned against the door frame with his arm across the doorway. He told her, "You are a very pretty thing." She ran out of the stall and ducked under his arm, which was still across the entry, and almost ran over the waitress. She told the server about the man in the bathroom, and they stood there, just across from the restroom hallway, waiting for him to come out. After a few minutes, the waitress smiled and asked, "Was he drunk?" When the guest answered yes, the server said, "That was George. He used to be here a long time ago." The Zoar Hotel has been acquired by the State Historical Society and is rumored to be quite haunted, which has been claimed by both guests and employees. It is supposedly one of the most haunted buildings in the town. And during the 1970s, the hotel experienced a resurgence in popularity with an owner who operated the Rathskeller in the basement as a bar, adding live music. The food was excellent, and people came from miles around to eat. The owner had a picture of a Zoar woman that he hung in the small seating area between the upstairs bar and the basement Rathskeller. The picture gave off an eerie feeling to nearly everyone who worked there. The employees felt that the spirit of Mary Ralph, one of the hotel's previous owners, hated this picture. Many times it was found turned over facing the wall. And there were times when it would disappear from the wall entirely and be found hidden in various places. Finally, the owner began to chain the picture in place. It was said that Mary's spirit hated the woman in the painting. The woman pictured was rumored to be President McKinley's mistress. This would be reason enough for a pious Zoar woman to be upset. The very idea of glorifying someone she would consider a wanton woman, especially on the walls of her hotel, must have been too shocking to let pass. One ghost that is commonly seen at the location is that of former owner Alexander Gunn, who appears mostly in the observatory room, which used to be his bedroom. Gunn was a wealthy non-separatist who moved to Zoar at the age of 40 and made his life one long, lavish party. Many have heard the sound of revelry coming from the top floors. Glasses clinking, laughter, and people talking echo through the building. And it is assumed that one of Alexander Gunn's infamous soirees is still taking place. Now, one female employee was cleaning up an upstairs banquet room when a spinning wheel in the corner began to turn, and the foot pedal moving rapidly up and down. She left quickly. Others have seen a cradle that was in an upstairs room begin to rock. And one of the hotel owners in the 1960s dressed a doll in Zoar clothing and placed it on the landing at the top of the grand staircase. Later, she would find the doll standing upright on the bottom step, as though placed there on purpose. And after the hotel was closed and gutted, two brothers stopped in one night to look in the windows. They saw a glowing orb form into a gentleman appearing much like a maintenance man. They fumbled for their camera, and when they looked back up, the old man was at the window staring at them. The picture they snapped showed nothing. Then there are the ghostly haunts of house number 17. This was the boys' dormitory. Children were removed from their homes by the age of 3 so their mothers could resume their duties as contributing members of the society. The boys were raised in house 17 by elderly matrons who unfortunately lacked sympathy for the children in their care. Many a boy who stepped out of line during their time at the dormitory felt the wrath of a bitter elder, eager to instill discipline, and some boys died under their care, especially during the malaria epidemic as the canals were being constructed. In 1992, the house was purchased by a man named David, who wanted to turn the building into a bed and breakfast. David moved his entire family into the house and began the renovation. The family quickly learned that they weren't the only inhabitants of the home. David would begin to feel like he was being watched while working in the basement, but every time he would look around, nobody would be there. He even recalled a night when the rest of the family was fast asleep, and he heard the basement door open and footsteps creak down the stairs. Again, he was alone. Not a soul was in sight. David was so frightened after this event that he never worked alone in the basement at night again. Then the sounds coming from the attic began. The attic of the house had some strange odors, so David decided to remove the old wooden floor planks in hopes of finding the source. What he found instead were artifacts from a bygone era. Primitive tools, 1830s coins, toys, marbles. They were just some of the artifacts that looked as if they had been lost between the planks and the passing of time. Almost like discovering a time capsule. 5 weeks later, David was awakened by the sound of children laughing in the attic. He got out of bed and went and checked his children's rooms. Both of them were fast asleep. David was awakened several times during the next few days to this sound. Even his own mother, who was visiting from out of town, mentioned she heard the laughter. Then one early morning, when the family was still sleeping, David was awakened by the sound of crying coming from the attic. Again, he checked on his family and everyone was accounted for. Eventually, a neighbor mentioned to David that the house's previous owner had experienced the same phenomena. David and his family finally came to terms with their ghostly housemates, although the bed and breakfast never came to pass. All this talk about an attic haunting reminds me that we have in our own Curious History community a viewer who has taken the leap and started her own YouTube channel called Soma Twin Stories. She shared her very first video with me. It's a personal story about a haunting experience she had growing up in Connecticut. I'm leaving a link to her video in the description below, and I invite you to head there after this video. It's the perfect ghost tale where you can sit back, close your eyes, and let your imagination wander as she describes her encounter. Please take the time and give her channel a like and subscribe. I promise you won't be disappointed. Probably the most impressive first-hand account of a haunting in Zoar happened during one of the haunted lantern tours in house number 1. The same lantern tour that we are taking tonight and will have already posted to the channel as a live stream. We will leave a link to that video in the comments and description below. A guide was taking a group through the large building that Zoar's founder Joseph Bimler used to call home. And when they exited the house, they happened upon a man sitting on the outside walkway. He was pale as a ghost and seemed unable to speak. The guide asked if he was okay or if he needed help. He finally mustered the courage to ask her a question. "Are there any other guides dressed like you in the house?" When she answered no, the man again lost his voice and stared ahead with a bewildered, frightened expression. After some time, he began to recount to the guide that while he was in the house alone on a self-guided tour, he was walking by the staircase when he looked up and caught a glimpse of someone on the stairs to the 3rd floor. He turned and clearly saw an older woman clothed in plain dress and cap of the society. Her face was lined and careworn. She was walking on the stairs in a slow, methodical fashion. The man looked away for a brief moment, and when he looked back, she was gone. There was no doorway for her to duck into. She just vanished. Tour guides and volunteers report footsteps on the second floor when they go to lock up, but no one is ever there. The sound of radio static has also been heard echoing throughout the building. And one time, the sound of loud pounding came from inside the building after a volunteer locked the doors. Thinking that a visitor had been left inside, the employee hurriedly unlocked the place, only to find it empty. And yet the pounding went on and on. Now, ghosts aside, Zoar is a wonderful example of early American history. Its restoration brings to life a simpler time when the bare necessities were all that was needed for a community's survival, and the steps a group of people would take to ensure their lives and legacy would live on. Maybe the ghosts are part of that legacy, and they're here for those of us who need a little more reminding that our nation's past is just as important as the present, if not more so. Thank you for watching, folks. I'll see you next time. As we explore more curious history, please have a happy and safe Halloween. Take care.